Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, essentially. Um, Welcome to our webinar. To start off, what are we going to be talking about today, Thomas? We're going to be talking about AVD and Windows 365 and how you can right-size them with Stratosphere UX. So,
Exactly.
yes. So obviously, we're seeing lots of migrations from Citrix and Omnissa to AVD and Windows 365. So we thought this was a good time to do this webinar and kind of show how you can utilize Stratosphere because, there is a lot of costs involved in the various tiers, and we're going to show you some examples of that. And Thomas is going to go really deep on with some real customer data numbers, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you're right.
So let's get started. So, just in case anyone is not aware of who Liquidware are and what we do. So, essentially, what we do is a suite of solutions, which we call our Digital Workspace Solutions Suite. We have our application portability solution, Flex App, which is all about delivering apps seamlessly. So it's getting away from that kind of layered solution and delivering the apps when you need them. Then, along with Profile Unity, you have kind of our user and application management. You can deliver apps with context-aware preferences and more, and basically control how your desktop is. Then we get on to Stratosphere, which is what we're going to talk to today, which is all about monitoring and optimizing DEX. So Stratosphere has really, really detailed metrics, and we're going to show you some of those metrics today and some of the data that Stratosphere produces. And it's very useful in scenarios such as if you are in the situation where you're on, say, Citrix or Omnissa and you're migrating. It doesn't matter what platform you're on, if you're migrating to the other, for doing kind of side-by-side comparisons. And just one of the ways we can do that as well is around the costs and right-sizing your environments. And then finally, we have our newest solution, which is Command Control. Command Control is all about real-time remediation. It's a SaaS platform, so it allows you to monitor and remediate remote any endpoints from anywhere. And also, because it's a SaaS platform, the admin console, you can be anywhere as well. So it's not just the end users who get to be anywhere, the admin can be anywhere as well. So that's just a brief overview of what we do at Liquidware. So we're really looking forward to this. So we're going to get straight into it. So if you look at the value that Liquidware delivers, if we have sizing, so image optimization. So as I said, mentioned our Flex App solution there. You get to decouple applications from the operating system, so that optimizes your images. Application footprint reduction. What we see a lot is a lot of organizations have large applications in layers, and by decoupling them we reduce the footprint of those. And then license reclamation, this is one we're seeing quite a lot. Is a lot of organizations, I've been in organizations in the past where I've asked for Visio for a couple of days, and then a year later I still have it, and multiply that by whatever number of people, and you can see the costs add up. So that's one of the things we will be talking today. And we're going to get started then with the right sizing of VMs, because that's so important from not just a cost perspective, but also a performance perspective. Because if they're under spec, it can affect productivity, and then they're over spec, then there's the costs. And then other kind of values we as Liquidware bring is about the application life cycle. Stratosphere in particular looks at reducing your login time and your size. We, as I said, I mentioned about migrations. We can obviously streamline DR, and then about tool consolidation. So moving on, just to say why this is really important, is this is just a basic comparison between the medium and upper tier on AVD. So if you look at compute, it's $35,000. On the upper tier, it's $65,000. That's a pretty big gap, and you can see the same across all of that. So the total difference is about 36,000. So this is why we're kind of going through this today, is show if this is incorrect, this can cause a lot of performance pain in terms of productivity of users, but also a lot of costs. And that's what Thomas is going to get into now in a minute. So that's on AVD, just a comparison between the two tiers. You've got a similar story across Windows 365. So you have multiple tiers. And there's a cost difference between the tiers. So that's why these kind of exercises are really important, because of the cost implications and the performance implications. So I am now going to hand over to Thomas.
Thank you, James. Let me take over. And this should be straightforward. We'll try to make that as smooth as possible. Here we are. And hopefully you can see my screen. All right. So thanks again, James. I'm now going to take you through, I thought it would be interesting to look at shared tips and methodology and process on how you can right-size your AVD environment, but in going through the lens of real use cases. This way you'll get a better idea of how we come to realize or how you can achieve those savings. So the first example I'm going to take you through is by using Stratosphere. So it's an example of right sizing or sizing an AVD environment solely using Stratosphere UX. The use case I'm going to talk about started a few years back. We used to have a fairly generic, basic ROI tools on our websites that now has been changed, or I should say modernized. We'll talk more about it later in the presentation. But in which we kind of ask a few questions, and from there we project how much money we think we can save, you can save using our solution. And a customer engaged us with that, and the numbers, as you can see, were fairly big for 15,000 users. And one of the areas where we thought we can optimize the environment was in right sizing their AVD environment. And as you can see here from the numbers, we're forecasting, again, based on very basic questions, about $2 million in cost avoidance around right sizing. The project lead, the director, came back and says, well, that's great, but a lot of that is BS. I don't care about soft cost. I don't care about time. I just want to make sure I want to focus on the right sizing approach. Actually, two of them. One of them was application. How can we optimize the application footprint and right sizing? So we decided to move forward and says, yeah, let's dive in, and instead of projection, let's actually measure and see what we can expect. So we had Stratosphere running as in a in a POC environment. So we used the data from Stratosphere, and we looked at the usage, and from there was more like an educated guess, more like based on data. We came back and say, okay, we think we can save you about 2.2 million in right sizing, improving the density. Small things to mention, but important. These customers was using multi-user, multi-session AVD instance, and optimizing your application. The project lead actually pushed us back and says, that's great, but I don't want projection. I want to be sure. So we agreed to do a pilot or a proof of value, where we actually, the customer went as far as implement the changes we recommended in their production live environment, although smaller, to actually measure the impact. We saw that, and we basically saw, quickly put, that we're able to raise their density by 30 or 40% of users. And as you can imagine, that's a big difference when it comes down to cost. So improving the density by user by using, and that was achieved by doing two things, most importantly. One, change the instance type. I'm going to come back to that because it's very important. It wasn't about the size of the VM. It was about the configuration of the VM. More specifically, the ratio between CPUs and memory. And two, we turn on Optimizer, which is a feature in Stratosphere, I won't get through the too much details, but basically what Optimizer does is it promotes or elevate the process of application that are in the foreground and reduce the process of those that are not. In doing so, you basically can shave a lot of memory and CPU that are consumed by process that the end user is not seeing. It's not on their front on their foreground. By doing that, we're able to guarantee or maintain the user experience, the UX experience of their session while removing CPU and memory consumptions. AKA, you can put more user in the same box. You've just improved your density. Now, if you guys are considering single user session AVD or Windows 365, the same concept apply, but it's going to be different math. What it will allow you to do to some extent is reduce the size of a VM for a customer or an end user, maintain the user experience while going from maybe 4 CPUs, 4 cores to 2 cores. Keep the user experience, save money on the instance. Great. So we prove of that, and the end result came back. And the two things I want to draw your attention to is the following. Once we applied the lesson learned from the pilot, we realized that we could, based on those numbers, extrapolating to about 1,200 users, 12,000 users, we could reduce the instance from 1,500 to 1,000. So that's almost like a 50% improvement. But you see here that the monthly price, this is coming from the AVD price list, went up 367 to 420. And that's because of the change in VM type. I'm going to come back to that, but I can't stress enough that in a lot of scenario, we've seen that as the first step. And the first, not mistake, but the first opportunity to save money. And it's choosing the wrong instant type. Simply put, in AVD, you have, I think, 5 different families of instance. The 3 primary one are basically based on the CPU to memory ratio. The general purpose VMs have 4 gigs of memory per core. The memory optimized is 8 to 1, and the CPU optimized have 2 to 1. What this means to you is if you pick the wrong type of instance, you might be pinging your CPU while barely using the memory. In other words, you're leaving resource on the table. So you're paying for resource you cannot exceed because you're either CPU bound or memory bound. So choosing the right VM type is the key. Here, that was the key to the success beyond Optimizer. Change your instant type. I can't remember exactly, but I think they were CPU optimized. Move them to memory optimized. That was slightly more expensive. But in exchange, so you raise the price from 367 to 420. So we're looking at, horrible at math, maybe a 10, 20% increase in price, but you reduce the number of instances by 50%. Big difference. End result, $1.3 million potentially saved just on your compute cost. Fast forward a year later, and this is why I love this example, because the customer kept us honest. The customer asked us to come back and do a value realization exercise, looking back at the environment and says, okay, how did we get back? How much money did we get back? Did we actually achieve that $1.3 million savings? They didn't. They achieved about $800,000. Why is that? It was really interesting. We dive into it. I won't bore you with the details, but the long story short is, one, they didn't implement the change on 100% of the users. That's something we should have forecasted. It's naive on our end to assume that, especially with an environment that big, with 12,000 users, you don't turn on a dime. So implementation time is a factor. So assuming you can achieve all of that in the first year is probably foolish. So that was the first one. The other one too is environments is end user workload is a living and breathing thing. Things change. In their case, they've added a series of new applications. I want to say one of them was maybe AI bound that consume a lot more resources. So all in all, achieving 800,000, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think the solution cost for us was about 200K. So you can do the math. It was well worth it for the customer. But it kind of sparked another discussion, which was, okay, things are changing. How do we adjust? How do we adapt? They did a try run with auto scaling from AVD. We're not happy with it. I don't have the details, but from what I understand, the main thing was the lack of control. And one thing they were afraid of, maybe they experienced it, is a sudden spike would trigger the generation of a number of instances and cost them a lot of money. So they didn't want to lose that control. They purchased or licensed Nerdio to do their management, very happy with it, but they also realized they need to keep an eye on it. So that sparked the creation of that report, which is still actually in progress, believe it or not, where that they use to actually keep an eye, keep the pulse on how their management threshold and settings are being made. So they can react to a change in workload before it costs them another $1 million. Couple things in there I want to mention that you may take in consideration after you resize or as you plan the migration, or if you're just running on AVD. Number one, the bottom one, we're tracking the resource usage. We're comparing that to the settings in Nerdio. If you're not familiar with Nerdio, it's a great tool. One of the things it does is it basically it enables you to provision and turn on and scale your pools based on your predicted workload demands, aka number of users coming in online. That threshold, is a number. It's, without going into too much detail, it's basically saying, okay, I'm going to assume based on the Stratosphere data that each host is capable of, let's say, handling 80 users. When you get to, and you set up a number in Nerdio that says, I just want to maintain 8 users margin on each host. Okay, when you reach that level, when you're at 70, that's when you spin out a new VM. Great. What we do on the back end with Stratosphere is we compare that number of hosts with the actual workload. So we translate, instead of a fixed number, we translate the CPU and memory in terms of user capacity. Make things simpler. If each user used 10% CPU and 10% memory, my theoretical user capacity for that VM is 10% times 10. So we translate that and we keep monitoring that so you can measure the actual capacity and number of users with the setting in Nerdio. And you can detect if you've been over aggressive or other conservative. In other words, you don't want Nerdio based on that, let's say, 8 users threshold, which is a number, to start spinning a new VM when you're only running at 50% capacity. The other side is also bad. Can't remember why actually, but it's bad. Where you don't want to reach that 80%, 100% capacity while barely at 5 users. So this allows you to make sure you update, maybe on a weekly, maybe on a monthly basis, your Nerdio settings to be as close to that sweet spot. In their mind, in their world, they wanted to be in that 80% effective capacity. The other things we monitor is balance of resource. That goes back to the machine profile. Remember, I mentioned about CPU intensive, memory intensive. So we track things as whether a machine at a certain point of time is memory bound, or if it's memory heavy, and vice versa, memory heavy, CPU heavy or CPU bound. Then we actually compare the two, and we use a ratio that says, okay, compared to capacity, if your memory or CPU heavy, you can have a number. And let's say that everything's equal. You're basically increasing your workload exactly the same or using the same. The ratio will be 1. Basically, it's 1 to 1. It's exactly the same. Spoiler alert, never happens. But it's measuring the ability to measure if I'm on the 25% heavy on memory or 25% heavy on CPU. Compare that to the actual setting on that instance. If I'm, generally speaking, consistently 30, 40, 50% CPU heavy, but I have a memory optimized instance, I'm in the wrong place. I need to make those adjustments. So great tool to actually measure, make sure you're on target, and avoid those costs to creep back in. Final things we added into that, adding more I would say more insight into how you're using those resources. And those are the two tables on the bottom line, at the bottom right. Detection on application leak, memory or CPU leak. So what application are consuming your resource? So if there's something that generally increase slightly your over time your resource usage, being able to detect it, notify a change or delta in CPU or memory consumption, so you can act on it. And the last one is we came up with our own uh, calculated or field called a noisy rating. And simply put, this is to help you identify noisy neighbor. It's not rocket science. We're basically comparing the amount of compute resource a single user is consuming compared to the average of the other users in that same box. If you take the example here, you have an admin.dll that is consuming 65% workload on that machine, while the other users are using 7 in average. What do you do with those nosy neighbor? Up to you, completely up to you. It's good to know. For these customers, what they're doing is they're flagging and reviewing them, I think, every week or every month, and trying to make a decision on whether those users should go away from multi-user. And they're setting up a separate pool of single user so they can have the resource they need without impacting everybody else. And eventually, I think the costs um, will be beneficial. So you're not eating up a very expensive VM. That user was taking 2/3 of a very expensive VM. Give him the dedicated resource and have potentially 2/3 of users using that VM. So moving forward and things for you, just want also to recap, and I cannot stress that enough. The first thing, so we built a template report based on everything we've learned from that customers and others that is accessible for you guys to use, and we use that to do AVD sizing, whether you're already in AVD or you're moving to AVD. We do a number of things, but the first one is determine your machine profile by group. Should they be CPU, memory, or general purpose? That's the big one. Second, we establish some type of heat map of your users, of your machine. Again, based on actual data, actual resource consumption. The idea here is to count the number of bell curves you're going to find. You can see here in that example that I typically have, and obviously more detailed analysis is needed, but you can see that you have basically two bell curves. You're going to have one group of users that are currently using about one core of CPU, while the other group is using two. Doesn't mean you give them one. For the first group, you'll probably give them two cores, and the second one four. But at least you've got those two pools. Same thing on memory. A big one around basically between 5 and 10 gigs, and the other one more in the 10 to 20. So that's going to help you a lot in trying to determine how many pools do I need. And finally, modeling. A lot of math. You can do everything with an Excel spreadsheet. You don't need us once you have the detailed data and resource usage, but we've actually thought about speeding up the process and helping you. So we've uploaded in that report all the different Azure instant type, so you can play what if scenarios. So if you look at that X screen, looking at memory intensive workload, they picked a series which was EV4. The report from Stratosphere will basically place those two groups, and you can see where it matched those bell curves between E2 V4 and E4 V4. So you can basically have your sizing and your I would say yeah, your workload is your buying sheet is done. You can just go and start to provision them in Azure. And that's the first example. I'm going to pause, see if there is any question. I don't see any.
No,
Um,
I think we're good to go on. I think you highlighted a really good point there, Thomas, around instance sizes and the importance of them, and the impact it can have. And I think you highlighted it very well that people should find that useful to see kind of that the impact, the instance size is so important.
Yes, yes. And again, it's all about what we focus on is the white space.
Mm.
Is having CPU and compute costs that you pay for, but you're not touching. It's just wasted money. Um, I see a question about is I assume this is similar to for Citrix. Does it size delivery group based on its performance of usage? Yes. At the end of the at the end of the day, it's more math. I would say the main difference from Citrix is if you're considering Citrix on-prem, then you have a lot of you have more flexibility. So instead of looking at instant types, we basically broke it down by number of cores and memory. So yeah, same concept, more flexible, actually simpler. But if you're considering Citrix on AVD, same ID, exact same ID. So same concept. Really, any workload on AVD or Windows 365 will apply. One last thing I'll mention is there's a um, couple of consideration when fine tuning or revising the number. Number one, numbers don't are not exactly the same if you're I would say the approach is not the same if you're going single user or multi-user. That's one. Multi-user to simplify, there is no, I would say, once you set up your machine type, which is the most important, then it's just a math issue. I can put twice as many user on a 48 core machine than I can do on 24. Just there's no right answer. So the strategy will guide you, but then you can choose on which one is best for you. Are you looking to to put a lot of eggs in the same basket or smaller? And there's a mid-range to reach. You want to balance cost because cost is not the same, as well as risk. So that's the first thing. The other thing too, and that's more about when you're pulling the data, and it's something if you engage us of using whatever you're using to capture the actual workload, time and days is extremely important. We're dealing with peaks and valleys of CPU and memory, and there's a couple things to avoid. First, if your machine, let's say your physical or virtual, doesn't matter, are running 24/7, uh, but the user are not, you want to exclude those off hours and weekends because it's basically gonna water down your usage. Not good prediction. Also, the I would say the granularity of the time makes a very big difference. We could capture, and you can grab the information down to the minute interval. And I'll tell you, if you do that, you're going to find out that every single user is going to max out that 100% CPU at some point during the day, typically between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning. That's way too granular. At the same time, to get the average over a month is way not enough data. So balance the two. And
Okay, Thomas, we have one more question before you get
yes,
going.
go for
Um,
it.
can, can we help customers identify different workload personas in their environments and map them to appropriate VM SKUs?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, I love the term of workload persona because not only on CPU and memory, absolutely, we can map that. We'll basically follow the same template that we do. We did another project like last month with a customer for which uh, desktop persona was not compute and memory, and this one was really interesting, was application used. And so they we with Strategy Data, we built a report or dashboard, I should say, that allows them to say, okay, I think they're fairly big. I want to say 20,000 users. And they have VDI all over the place. And their challenge was we need to move to, let's call it VDI 2.0. I can't remember if they were going to AVD or VMware, oh, sorry, Omnisa or Citrix, but they were going to a new configuration. And because this company have grown by acquisition, they had different silos of VDI managed by different people. So it was the wild, wild west. And the first consideration is, what application should I put in that first image, and the second one, and the third one? So we use Stratosphere to look at patterns and usage, and common usage, so they can say, oh yeah, if I set up an image with this, and this, I'm gonna satisfy the need of X number of users. So play those multiple application used compared to and building what they called was desktop persona. So nothing to do with CPU, but interesting nonetheless. And then all of that became a moot point once we start moving to FlexUp, but that's a different story. All right, good segue into next user example, which is about licensing. So it seems a bit off topic since we're talking about sizing AVD environments, but I wanted to bring it through because ultimately I think it's very much on topic. So far, we talked about sizing environment based on CPU and memory requirements, or what you see the user consume. But application are also, you also want to consider what goes into that workload. And that includes the profile, the user data, as well as the application installed. Now, application installed but not used are not going to affect your CPU and memory because they're not used, they're not running. I mean, there's a small percentage that will have automatic services that runs, even if the user don't launch them, that, yeah, will affect you because it raised the CPU. But in my experience, at least, it's nominal, not something I even looked at. But the one thing it will impact is the disk space you need. And that's true for the user data as well as the user profile. So I'm going to take you through an example that did not start as a sizing exercise at all. Customer came to us, and one thing we talked about in our basic initial ROI study is, hey, we can help you save money on your licenses. Great. Customer called us on it and say, show me the money. So we started about, I can't remember, I think 2,000 users in that environment. And we have Stratosphere running. So we run in Venture with Stratosphere and gather all the application that were running on their environment and looked at which one was installed versus used. Very simple, very basic. We took data for 2 weeks. 2 weeks was my call, my general ID. That customer was US based. If someone has not logged in 2 weeks, they're not working there. Almost no one takes 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks vacation at a time. So I figured that 2 weeks data is enough to capture a good sample of how applications are used in that environment. From there, what we did, if you guys are not familiar with Stratosphere, it's very much aiming at capturing everything. And in most cases, it's a good thing. When it comes to licensing, it could complicate things because Stratosphere will capture everything. So when you ask Stratosphere, show me all the application install versus use, it's going to throw everything back at you, including things you don't care. Notepad, any Windows Explorer, etc., etc. It's very thorough in looking at all the executable, all the processes running on the backend. So the initial data that Stratosphere gives us is great, but it's not what I would call actionable intelligence. So with that first customer, what we did is we basically use AI to validate and confirm the data. We took the data sent by Stratosphere. Stratosphere helped us filter out the noise. It's able to qualify, for example, application that are, or processes that are system processes, et cetera, et cetera. But once this is filtered out, we throw that back to ChatGPT. ChatGPT came back with, hey, those are the instances that corporation pay for, and this is the average price. So we use that data coming from ChatGPT to match the application that were installed but not used with their cost. End result, 1.6 $7 million saving for that customer. We've learned our lessons. Actually, this one came from after the first use case I mentioned, where we decided to be cautious and says, you know what, we're not going to assume that customers will be able to apply all those change in the first year. Just getting license reclamation is a big exercise. So we added a variable in that custom report that basically allows you to set up your widget, and that's what you see on the bottom of the screen, where we basically went in by default and assume, you know what, we're going to go ahead and assume that you can only reclaim 50% of those license. And that's because of multiple factors, not just the customer ability to execute, but contracts. You've probably signed enterprise license, site license. Actually, enterprise license was excluded from there, but it's more and more common to buy 3-year contracts, 5-year contract, etc. So it's not because you're not using them that you'll be able to get out of the contract the same year. So we want to factor that in. Interesting piece was that specific customer got us in touch with their software asset management team, who simply put sent us their contract list and basically say, hey, that's what we're paying. And let me tell you, this was probably the most difficult part of the job, because the name on a PO or a SKU doesn't correspond to the application name as seen by Microsoft Windows. So there was a lot of searching and reconciling. But the interesting piece for me was that once we were able to measure our projection, again, if you remember, that's derived from pricing provided by ChatGPT, which we all know not 100% accurate, with the actual list of POs or price that the customer paid for the past year, we've figured out that we're about 80% accurate in average. So that was very satisfying to know that, yeah, we're not 100%, obviously not, but we're in the ballpark. So it's something we can rely on. So regardless of whether you're resizing AVD or not, definitely something I encourage you to do, because that could free up a lot of IT budget for the upcoming years for you. It also led us to another challenge, but then the realization of an additional savings, and I'm circling back to AVD sizing, which is one, the ability to execute. So for us, if I'm going back to Stratosphere and the initial filing, we're very happy with ourselves saying, hey, you can save $1.7 million in savings. All we've done at that point is identify the savings. We have we can't claim those savings because you still need to execute on it and actually save that. In any virtual environment, Citrix, Omnissa, AVD, it poses a challenge, which is, how am I going to reset my base image, my golden image, to accommodate for all those different user-specific needs? Not realistic, not achievable, because you're going to end up with a gazillion base image to address for each individual use case. So that's great that there's $1.7 million in savings, but if I can't change my environment to realize that, it's a moot point. It's useless, and that's where FlexUp comes in. FlexUp, as James mentioned, gives you the ability to decouple the application from the image, and you can deliver application based on any filters. Therefore, now I have a way forward. Now I can actually I can achieve those savings. I can execute, pulling the data from Stratosphere that's going to tell me who's using the application, setting up a filter in FlexUp. I'm not putting the application in the base image, and only people that needs it get FlexUp. So for me, at least, I would say the ability to save on licensing and truly achieve license reclamation cannot be claimed only by using UX, can also not easily be achieved by only using FlexUp. It's the combination of both that truly allows you to achieve that. Because UX show you the path, FlexApp is the one that will get you there. In doing so, we actually start looking at the application footprint, and that led us to think, wait a second, if um, if I'm removing those applications from the base image, I don't need the D space. So the number you see in that small screenshot you see on the right side was actually based on a real customer, different one, not same one, than the one doing the licensing. That was using Citrix on AVD, on Azure, and using Citrix app layering, which was great, except what I've learned was that Citrix requires to have the application, the entire layer, actually copied on each instance running in Azure. Long story short, by looking at what they were consuming in terms of extra storage, there was basically a lot. We determined that we could save about 50% by implementing Profile Unity that reduced the profile size and removing a lot of the application footprint, aka storage requirements. In other words, what we realized just looking at the customer was nice enough to send us their Azure spend. We looked at the column for the additional storage that they've allocated for each instance and did the math. Look inside, look at how much was consumed by the application. And from there, we figure out that we could save 50% just on the extra storage cost. For them, 2,000 users, that represented about 300K a year in just extra storage they're paying for the VM. Excuse me. And that's the end of the two stories. I wanted to take a step back to share beyond those two stories. We keep monitoring those change and those benefits with customers which were nice enough to share their feedback after implementation. So far in general, what we've determined is we saved about 12% of your compute cost in AVD, 90 gigs of extra storage removed per VM, again in AVD, but could apply to anything, and about $110 per user in license reclaimed. So take that with a grain of salt. It will evolve or change depending on your situation. I could probably make the argument that a customer that is very precise and monitoring their AVD sizing very, I would say, with very intensely, we might not save them that much money. I can also make the argument that we've seen case where that 12% is ridiculously low. Point in case, my first customer, where we saved them, I think was 30% of the cost or something like that. So yeah, take those into consideration. Moving forward, we're building those. I've shown a couple of ad hoc reports, the sizing report, license reclamation report. We're building what we call the blueprint series, which are designed to be management, ongoing monitoring, and optimization. The idea here is instead of doing those one shot, I'm going to fix everything and then move forward and forget about it, to have a series of dashboards you can use on an ongoing basis that will alert you when one of those things goes on the side. You can see here two examples where we're starting to track undersized and oversized machine. Some KPIs that are designed to alert you when you're basically not as optimized as you think. Knowing that you'll never get 100%, but at least you can see trend and see variation and see if there is something that will alert you, not on a minute by minute, but more like week to week basis, if there are some correction action you need to take in your environment for sizing or performance. And I think that's it. That's it on my end. James, I don't know if you want to take over or if you want me to finish. I'm okay either way.
Yeah. So just what we're pointing out here is essentially our value calculator, which is on the Liquidware website. And what you've got here is just some information around the savings you can make just by using our solutions. And the great thing about the calculator is you can put in your own values and get an estimate. And then obviously when you work with us, you'll get the accurate numbers, but it gives you a kind of a ballpark number to start with.
Absolutely. One thing mentioning also, we focus this entire webinar on cost optimization. I mentioned a couple tools like Optimizer from Stratosphere and FlexApp. It's worth noting that our goal is always to improve user experience, and something that is not difficult to quantify, but it's usually the non-tangible, well, tangible benefit, but not financial benefits, is the improvement of user experience or DEX. That's a constant in our benefits that we deliver. It's always something we strive to provide tools to maintain or improve user experience. Couple things we also wanted to mention. We launched not too long ago on our website the concept of liquidware sparks. Those are tools, solution developed by our field engineer. The best way I can describe it is we have our dev who are building a solution focused on the future, and they're usually looking at time horizon of 1, 2, 3, 4 years, looking at the innovation, technology innovation, and market adjustment, etc. Then you have our field, and by nature, Liquidware is very much an engineering company. So they see things on the field, needs, not issues, but needs or features that the customer need on the field that may come later in the dev, and they build solution or tools to basically fill that gap. So something I would definitely encourage you to take a look at. Those are complementary technology or tools that RSCs on the field, really the experts in our solutions, have put into that library so that you can use to maximize the use of our solutions. So they could be, I would say, quality of life. They could be acceleration, anything like that. A couple of the report I mentioned will be added to the Spark, so it's also something you can download and use for yourself. And that's a way to stay as close as possible to customer evolution and needs, and our dev on the same side.
We have a question.
Yes, I see that. Awesome.
So that's a pretty detailed question. So maybe just some of the high level stuff, and I will, and what we can do is we can also share our installation guide from the doc site as well. So maybe just give a high level overview of some of the things.
Absolutely. The quick answer is on the UX side, to get the data, to do the sizing, we need a VM. So we deliver our solution as a virtual appliance. So we need some place to put it on, and any hypervisor or even cloud is good enough for us. We have all the templates. We then deploy an agent on the machine, very small agent. So you'll see, I think we take 0.2% CPU, about 10 megs in memory, etc. Collect the data. All the data we collect stays within your organization. It's not SaaS. We don't export data. API permission is only used to run the export the data. So it's something, again, in your environment. And if you need our help, we can exchange data or by setting up a call or session. So we will not pull the data directly from you, and it's very easy or lightweight to install. There is no installation process since it's a virtual appliance. It's kind of same concept with FlexApp and Profile Unity, except it's not a virtual appliance. You download, you install that on the VM, and fairly low requirement. I think it's two vCPUs, so very lightweight. And all of them are available for download with an EVA license on our website.
Thanks very much, everyone, for your time today. We really appreciate it. If you've kind of got any follow-up questions, the best way to really do that is through our Slack community. So there's essentially a QR code there. Scan the QR code, join the community. You get access to myself, to Thomas, the entire Liquidware team, all the way up to our senior management. you'll get answers to all your questions. So thanks everyone for your time, and we will see you on the next webinar. Thanks.
Thank you all.